The
Okay.
next thing I noticed with this amplifier, it is loud. I mean, I have this 100-watt Mesa Boogie, and that's usually I can run that between 10:30 and 11 o'clock because it doesn't have numbers on it. In yours, I can barely get off of one, and I'm like, turn this thing down, man. Is that have to do with your transformers, or it just seems
Well,
well when
it,
you have the tone stack turned off, then it's like through
that's
the roof.
really, yeah, that's going to be really. I mean, you're almost at the point of, what I call pure amplification. You turn the tone stack off, if you did that and turned off the presence control, which takes out the negative feedback loop, you're down to your input volume, and it's going right back. It's basically bypassing all of the circuit in there, and then it hits the power tubes, and you have your master volume. That's that's loud. I don't care if it was a 10-watt amp, that's going to be loud. Just because that's that's straight guitar signal. And then depending on the speaker you're plugged into, the efficiency of the speaker is going to change that perceived loudness. But yeah, if you have the tone stack on and the presence control on and everything like that, and I'll call it more normalized, and that first input volume level is somewhere around 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, or whatever, what I consider, I don't know, practice or bedroom volume, you can achieve. And yes, you're going to be around number one, 1.5, maybe, on the master volume. They're loud because it's, at the end of the day, it's a dual 606, amp. It's technically pushing almost 50 watts, but I call it, the little amps like what you have, the Black Loop of the 40-watt amp. It'll keep up with any any 40 or 50-watt amp that's out there, for sure. I I I've joked about it with people. I have old Marshalls and stuff that I kind of grew up playing, and so even their master volume ones, the older ones, the JMPs, the JCM 800s, whatever.
Yep,
you it sounds really thin. It sounds really thin. It sounds nasty, nasty, nasty. All of a sudden, it sounds great, and it's super loud.
yeah.
And it might only be on 2. And I don't know if that little amp that the Black Loop that you have would compete with something like that, because those things were, unleash the beast kind of thing. But yeah, they can get loud fairly quick. There's a trick to that I've, when it really is unruly, if somebody's trying to really play, there is a certain thing where you have a certain volume where, any amp, at least you're getting some signal into the power amp, sounds better. Yeah, okay, every amp sounds great turned way up. I get it. But there is a certain thing that if you get too low and you're not really enough signal really passing through the amp, and especially in the concept of not having it be distorted. I think it's another thing when you're trying, when you're doing post phase inverter master volumes like they do on Marshall type of circuits and everything. Part of the deal is that you're trying to turn it down and yet have a ton of gain. It doesn't necessarily hold up when you're trying to turn it down and keep the amp really clean. and and that's another thing where, like our master volume is not a post phase inverter master volume, like so it's more of a return off of the effects loop. So it's that way, it's pre-phase inverter, so you get all the tone of the amp there, which is also why it can get loud fairly quick. But the trick I was going to say, which I get it, some people don't want to do this, but you can put whatever it may be. I usually recommend a buffered volume pedal, but it doesn't have to be buffered, and it doesn't have to be a volume pedal. It can be a passive volume pot, basically. But if you put a buffered, I prefer buffered because you're probably going to have plenty of cables going in and out of the send and return. But if you put a buffered volume pedal in the loop, something like Layla has a great one. I'll mention a manufacturing name, but they have a great volume pedal. You put it in the effects loop, and you can set your master volume. It doesn't have to be super high, but you can set their master volume on the amp where you really like it, and completely control it with the volume pedal. And there's quite a few guys that I have doing that because they're playing gigs that are more on the jazzier, cleaner side of things, and they have to be very, very low in volume. They're background music at a dinner event or whatever the case may be, and I get it. And the nice thing with doing that is you get the control of that volume pedal. Is it also becomes a solo boost, if you want to think of it that way, and you can and it doesn't change the inherent sound of the amp. You can drive the amp still and rely on the preamp gain. You can keep it clean. It just allows a bigger variance in the overall volume output. That's what I usually recommend if somebody's really having problems keeping the amp under control. But for the most part, I obviously when I'm testing amps here or whatever, I'm kind of usually running the amps, and it might seem a little loud, but I run the master volumes on any of our amps usually around 2, the number 2. Wow. On the face of it. That seems to be, it's loud, but you can still sit in the room with it. But it all depends on how you're setting the levels on the clean channel. Yep. and the drive channel. So all of that interacts. I go out and play gigs. I'm more of a classic rock guy. I'm playing gigs that I'm not saying we're super loud, but where I have no problem running my amp at the number 2, or which would be roughly 9 o'clock, 9 to 10 o'clock, and I can get away with that in the places I'm playing. So I don't need to do the volume control in the loop thing or anything like that. But yeah, I can completely understand it when you have to play a gig or do something where it's super quiet. Yeah, I usually, put another type of volume, like a pedal or whatever, in the loop, and that gives you, a huge variance of volume then that you can get it, quite honestly, whisper quiet and still keep the tone of the amp there.
Yeah, I live in a small apartment and building. It's an old building with plaster walls, so I can turn it up a little bit. But
Yeah.
your master volume works great. I mean, I can get it set to where I can get the tone I want and the volume level I want and everything. But I
Yeah.
just noticed when I first got it, I was like, okay, I can turn the knob here. I was like, whoa, what was that?
Yeah, there's and the thing on the way our master volume works, the other thing is, which okay, this isn't normally going to happen, in certainly in a gigging situation, but for for guys that do run them through, the amps through attenuators, or they end up in a recording studio and they can turn the things up and let them, like in an actual studio where you get to, run the amp. So our master volume will start to induce power amp distortion when you get it up to about 1 or 2 o'clock on the dial, because it's allowing so much signal to hit the power amp, the power section. So you start getting into that territory of old Marshall plexis where you didn't have a master volume, and the whole point was to kind of dime everything. You can squeeze that power amp distortion out of our amps too, if you want to go the complete opposite and really crank it up. But it's, I don't necessarily recommend it. It's not something that's necessary in today's world. There's guys that use attenuators with the amps because they want that certain thing out of it. But I have found that with my amps, like you said, that I think the master volume works really well. It's just that it's that lower part of it that really, I'll say, is a little bit sensitive, but you can certainly dial it in and keep it quiet enough, and certainly quiet enough. I think that, if you did have a baby in the room next to you, you could probably be okay, it's so I don't, I've never really had the urge to change that because it seems to, we somehow over the years found a happy medium where the master volume works well. You have a large throw in it, and it doesn't really change the inherent sound of the amp unless you get it really, really low. And at that point, the speaker's not working. Yeah. You're not allowing the speaker to do anything. The power amp part of the amp isn't working. Really, it's not really pushing any air. It's not making the speaker move. Yeah. You got to take all that into account too. So there's, and the speaker is, a large, well, I don't want to say it's as important to the amp, but it's a major part of the amp sound. I know you did, the videos with the Mesa 112, I think you had with the Vintage 30, which is perfectly fine. Vintage 30 is a great speaker with that amp and works really well, but a Vintage 30 is very efficient. So it can get loud really quick. You put something a lot less efficient in there, even something like the Celestion G1265, it's less efficient than a Vintage 30, and you'll get even more volume out of it, and it changes the sound obviously because it's a different sounding speaker, but it'll a G1265 will, with that amp, smooth out the high end, drop the volume output a little bit, it changes the whole thing. Yeah. And I kind of equate speakers to pickups in a guitar. You can change pickups, and you have a favorite, whatever it is, Les Paul, and you can have whatever pickups are in it, and you change to any other pickup, and the whole sound of that guitar has changed. Yeah. The wood hasn't changed, your fingers haven't changed, the strings haven't really changed, whatever, but pickups will really change the electric sound of whatever the guitar is. Yeah. The same holds true with an amp and the speaker it's connected to. Okay. You change. All right,
I don't mean to cut you short, but I got a warning already that it's going to end soon. Is there anything you want to say? Is there any new models coming out? Anything you would like people to know?
I have whatever. The latest model, I kind of reintroduced a model very quietly. It's called a Black and Blues. It's one of our bigger amps, but I kind of, I'll say, redesigned it a little bit and updated it. But we have models, the bigger models to your Black Loop is a Black Verb, and so we have a Black Verb and a Blues Machine. I squeezed both of those amps into the Black and Blues. And I really like that amp. I always liked that amp. I think it's better than when we first made it years and years and years ago. So I always wanted to so I did reintroduce that. I do have a few other models I'd like to get out there, but I don't want to say I'm hesitant in doing it. I like doing it, but haven't had the time. I've done like a couple one-off models for customers, and a couple of them I really always wanted to make them standard models in the lineup, but I just haven't had the time to not only build another one, but just build the amp and introduce it again, because I've got all the other orders I've got to work on, and I don't want to push anybody's order aside. So I gotta wait on that. So, but outside of that, I mean, outside of that, my immediate plans for Red Plate is just keep plugging along and build the amps that, the orders that I have, and keep doing them. And if there comes a point where I don't have those orders or a lot of orders to work on, and I'm not pushing somebody, I don't want to, like I said, I don't want to push anybody behind or whatever. I just build them in the order that I get them, and get them shipped as soon as I can. If I get to the point where I can, I will make those other amps and take pictures of them, put them on the website, have these other models, and, obviously, sell those models, but I just haven't been able to squeeze those into the build list basically yet. So I do, and then if I get a wild hair, I scribble some stuff down and, hey, why don't I do this? But it takes, quite honestly, it's usually years before anything like that sees the light of day, because of building, the orders that I have.
Well, as far as I'm concerned, you've built a really good product. I've heard nothing but good things from you from looking around before I bought the amp. And that's all I can say. Alan Hines really talked you up. I talked to him on Patreon, Zoom meetings with him. I was on his Patreon page, and he had nothing but good things to say about you.